Wayne, thanks for coming in to talk about some of the history that we do not know. Now, you've brought three people in one place.
That's right.
To talk about. Well, let's start off with a guy who was a nationally known singer from Memphis in the early 50s, but his name wasn't Elvis.
That's right. There was a man from Memphis with an unusual first name called Snooky Lanson, who was the star of the TV show Your Hit Parade. And in the 50s, between 1950 and 1956, he was very much one of the most popular singers in the country because of his television exposure, and did concerts all over the country. And he was kind of a teen idol in the way that Frank Sinatra had been, and Johnny Ray and a few others. And he got the gig on Your Hit Parade in a very interesting way. He had performed with the Ray Noble Orchestra, and Ray Noble had been the orchestra leader for the Charlie McCarthy, Edgar Bergen show. And so he was singing on the radio, and then also had his own radio show in Nashville. So he was familiar with radio and had been a popular singer. He had done a version of the song The Old Master Painter, which sold more copies than any other version of that song in the late 40s. And Frank Sinatra had been the star of the radio version of Your Hit Parade. And it was transitioning to television in 1950, and Sinatra didn't want to be on television. He felt that he would be too overexposed,
yes.
and didn't really know whether this thing was going to work or not. So they hired Snooky Lanson. He was out performing and got a telegram and said, "Come to New York. We want you for Your Hit Parade." And so every week he would sing the popular songs. There were other people, Giselle McKenzie and a few others, who performed as well, of course, but he often performed the #1 song. And so it was very much a top 10 sort of program, where you would say, you know, the number 10 is this song, and then they do sort of a production number and perform the song. And so Snooky became very, very popular that way. And but it's another singer from Memphis who ends his national career, because in 1956, the top recordings in the country were rock and roll, including Hound Dog and other Elvis songs. Well, it was very difficult for these sort of smooth, swing, big band singers to transition into the more raucous sounds of rock and roll. And the story is that particularly when Hound Dog was #1, you know, Snooky trying to sing Hound Dog in a big band style didn't work.
No.
And so their ratings plummeted almost overnight. So they got rid of the entire cast and hired younger people who could perform the rock and roll songs that were then the top of the charts. So it was difficult for the whole show to transition, and it only lasted about a year or so after that when they tried to hire the younger singers. Snooky continued to perform. He would come back to Memphis sometimes, and had a radio show and a TV show in Los Angeles. Moved around a bit, and eventually came back to Tennessee and settled in Nashville, where he hosted a popular radio show. But he would come back to Memphis in the 60s and 70s, into the 80s, before he died in the early 90s, performing. He'd perform at Lakeland and other places around town. You know, a lot of people remember it, but then, you know, folks get forgotten. And Snooky is one of those people that, I mean, he was nationally famous, written about in national magazines and newspapers, but forgotten today.
Just drifted out of the history books somewhere along the way.
Right.
Well, I didn't know until you sent me an email that Memphis has a Star Trek connection.
Indeed we do. There is a man named Charles Washburn who graduated from Booker T. Washington High School, and as a young man he goes on to get a degree in business administration, but he's fascinated by the illusion of film, how you can take a story and create a world that doesn't otherwise exist. And so he applied to work at a television station in Chicago, but he was rejected because he was an African American. So he goes to Hollywood It's a natural place to go. He applies to the Directors Guild Assistant Directors School, and he gets accepted, and he is the first African American graduate of that school. Well, when he gets out, when he finishes the training program, he is hired by Desilu Productions, and specifically he's hired to be a directorial trainee on a new show called Star Trek that had debuted on NBC television a few months before. He starts in the spring of 1967, towards the end of the production of the first season. He's brought back for the second season as the second assistant director. His job was to hire all of the extras. He would write up and organize the daily call sheets so that the actors would know when they were required to be on the set. Probably the most interesting thing is he also cued the special effects that were going to be inserted later or that were part of the scene. The most remembered was the on the Enterprise, on the Starship, the doors opened automatically. Mm-hmm. Well, there are two crewmen behind that wall.
They're the automatic doormen.
That's right, and so they had to pull the door apart. Well, they can't see what's going on the other side, so somebody has to cue them. So it was Charles Washburn's job to cue them when an actor would walk up to the door for them to slide the doors open. And of course, sometimes that didn't work and didn't work quite correctly, so they'd slam into the door. There's a blooper reel that you can see that on YouTube where that happened several times. But Washburn was very well respected by the cast and the crew of Star Trek. He was fairly close to Gene Roddenberry, who created the show, and he was so well regarded that they actually named a character for him. There's a Lieutenant Washburn on the show that was named for Charles Washburn. And he would go on, as the third season was winding down, it was pretty clear, I think, to the cast and the crew that the show was going to end, that they were going to be canceled. So he goes on to other jobs. He works on The $6 Million Man. He works on a couple of feature films, goes back to the Star Trek universe. He's never able to direct his own film, which was a goal that he had, but he certainly had a strong impact on the direction of Star Trek. And it's part of the message of diversity. I mean, here he is, an African American, working on this show, and is so well regarded that they name a character for him. And shortly before his death, he had gone to a Star Trek convention, and thousands of people mobbed him when he was introduced. He was so, because he was this living connection to those early days, and knew the production, knew all of the actors, knew how the production worked inside and out. And of course, as time goes on, that's what people are interested in. They want to know, how was this made? And so, Washburn is someone who deserves to be far more well known, not only in Memphis, but throughout the country, because he's part of this long tradition of Memphis creativity. I mean, he did not allow, like most Memphians, he didn't allow obstacles to keep him from doing what he wanted to do. And that's what's so interesting about Memphis to me, is that it's really sort of a bottom-up town. The best of Memphis comes from, not from the powerful from the top, but from people from the bottom who say, I have a dream, I want to do this. And he grew up in a place where it was not unusual for people to follow their dreams and to succeed. And so Washburn is, I think, a very significant figure.
Tune in next week for part 2 of Wayne Dowdy's interview on the history you do not know.